So it was, I mean, you talk to a lot of authors, so I'm sure you've heard stories about bumps in the publishing process. And we had our bump. And so we basically immediately, we knew what we wanted to write right
Right.
after. And it was a story about youth sports. And we were really determined to write this story, and we worked really hard. And we ultimately did not, it was not sold to a publisher, so it's on the shelf. We may eventually pull that out and, and redo it, and, there's definitely thoughts to that. But the interesting thing that happened during that process was that, as Wendy mentioned, we had, during the Girls with Bright Futures writing process, we had written this idea, and then suddenly it seemed like it came to life, in the form of Operation Varsity Blues. And similarly, we were writing the youth sports manuscript, and we'd actually finished our first draft and already sent it to our agent. And the inciting incident in that story was a very serious, sudden medical emergency that happens to a player on the field. And shortly after we had finished that manuscript, we opened up the newspaper, and there was a European soccer player who had suffered the exact same malady on the field. And we were like so stunned. And so we sent the article to our agent and said, "Can you believe this? It seems like it happened again." And we were a little tongue in cheek about it, but it did feel like odd. And she sent back a note to us, or said to us, I can't remember if it was maybe in Zoom or whatever, but she said to us, we'll never forget, she said, "Oh my gosh, you two are the seers of upmarket fiction." And so we always kept that thought in the back of our heads, because we started thinking about what would happen if you really believed that were true, and if a writer really believed that what they wrote and published was they were going to manifest into reality. So that was an idea that kind of sat in the back of our heads for a while. And then when the youth sports manuscript ended up getting put on the shelf and we had to go and start from scratch, that was the idea that we could not let go of and just grabbed onto and ran with.
Okay, so this is a story about Thea Packer. She is an author who, she's a young grieving widow. Soon after her debut novel comes out, her husband Sam dies in the exact same way as the husband in her debut novel. And it was also the day that they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time. So the novel opens, and she is raising her daughter Lucy, who's now about 3.5, and she's still living with her in-laws, Rebecca and William, and she spends a lot of time with her best friend Franny. And so those are really our main characters.
And Franny's urging her to kind of get on with her life and forgive herself, like that, kind of stop blaming herself because she feels this inexplicable responsibility that somehow she had written this into existence, and she just can't let it go. And so Franny's really urging her to move on and move out of her in-laws' guest house and, kind of get a life. But she's just very stuck.
I mean, our whole way of working is just like a back and forth conversation. So when it's time to sketch out a character, the two of us are, what if, what if, what if, and we're building her and we're writing her down, because we both need to understand all the characters. So we create them all together, and we both write everybody. And so we both really need to have in our heads, this is what their childhood was like. This is like their backstory. They have a timeline. They have physical features. So we really create these very rich descriptions, but everything's done together.
But so she is very convinced that she has a manuscript that she had already written before the tragedy happened with her husband. And that was called Call of the Void. And it was about a child who gets kidnapped and like the effects on the family. And so that was a book that she cannot let go out into the universe, because now she is the sole protector of her beautiful child, and she's just too terrified. She could never live with that idea of that being out there. And so she's very stuck in her writing career, and her agent is starting to get frustrated with her. Her agent is this wonderful partner who really is like sees her as, you know, like a career partner, but she's starting to question whether Thea actually is committed to continuing her career and whether it's worth spending time with her. And so she kind of gives her an ultimatum to sort of light a fire under her. And Thea ends up coming up with this idea that comes from a bedtime story that she spins for her daughter, a little fairy tale. And the idea is to sort of write a story with all happily ever afters, because then what could go wrong if she puts it out into the universe? You know, only good things will happen. And so as she's kind of writing the story, and she ends up kind of through it's a long process, but she ends up settling on her larger than life hero as an astronaut. And then lo and behold, on the very day that her book launches, and kind of she's nervous and excited and like worried what's the future going to bring, and she goes to a dog park and she meets a man, and he's an astronaut. And so she cannot believe what is happening, and so she's very confused. Did she bring this about? Is it just the craziest coincidence on the planet? Yeah. Yeah. So that's the story kind of takes off from there.
I think the most important part of their romance is the banter. And I think that's something that like we enjoy,
right,
when we're consuming books or TV shows or movies, is really keying into really good dialogue.
Yeah, and humor and that sort of thing. And we read out loud every single part of every book that we write. And Wendy's usually the reader. She's got the librarian, you know, reading voice. So, and I'm the note taker. And so the dialogue is something that we take very seriously. We work really hard to make sure that nothing sounds wooden and everything feels natural. And so I think we both kind of contribute in that sense. And I mean, I've never dated an astronaut, and I don't think you have either. So
no.
Yeah. So a lot of it's just having fun and imagination. And
so Thea ends up trying to pacify Franny, her best friend, who's trying to get her to date and move forward with her life. And she very impulsively tells her that she's going to do that by getting her daughter a dog. And so she ends up following through on that because Franny makes her. And she lets her daughter name the dog. So her daughter is 3.5, and her husband, who's passed away, his name's Sam. And Lucy decides to name the dog Sam the dog, thinking that this name is going to make her mother happy. But it doesn't. And it really upsets the in-laws. And then if you think about the shortened version,
the initials,
yeah. STD,
yeah.
like, it really doesn't go over well with her mother-in-law. But he's a very lovable creature.